Welcome to the CEO Tech Talks podcast, where vision meets impact. I am your host, Ambreen Ahmed. Each episode, I sit down with exceptional leaders who are shaping the future of business, technology, and transformation. This show is about more than just success. It's about clarity, purpose, and those bold decisions that light the way forward. Join me as we uncover the insights, challenges, and breakthroughs from today's most inspiring voices. Leaders who are redefining what it means to lead in a rapidly changing world. This is CEO Tech Talks. Let's dive in. Today, we're joined by Lewis Richardson, founder of Creativity Crisis. Lewis works with leaders to unlock creativity and performance in high-pressure environments, something every CEO can relate to. Welcome, Lewis, and thank you for joining.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Well, let's get into it. Tell us about yourself and what you do.
Well, it's been a journey. Creativity Crisis, as a founder of that was a long, long time ago. When I first went into the corporate world, what I observed was a real lack of creativity in the way things were done. A lot of processes were in place, a lot of rules and regulations were in place, and I felt as if we were not doing a service to our clients and to our audiences and so forth in the way we created things. So I created this website, Creativity Crisis, and it's mostly been just a place for me to share my thoughts and ideas and kind of a launching point. That journey transitioned from, somebody just blogging about stuff to someone who over the last 40 years or so, I've been in technology and technology sales, which ended up or culminated in the end of me being a chief storyteller at IBM for a little more than a decade. Started back in like 2010, I guess it was. And that in and of itself just kind of represents the migration from historic sales, historic approaches to doing things and leading and trying to work with people to more of a conversational, story-led approach to things. So I now have the privilege of serving with a nonprofit. So I'm kind of out of the corporate world, which gives me a lot of freedom and flexibility at my age and my stage of life to give back and to help individuals that met along the way to try to repay them for some of their kindness and some of the things that they've done to pour into me. And so I do some story coaching and some executive leadership stuff, but mostly around communicating and how do you go about changing the way that you influence people and move people.
Interesting. That sounds so exciting and different from where I've been in corporate America in tech sales also.
Yeah.
So, well, what does a typical day look like for you?
For me, could be a typical day. I mean, it's one of those things where I deal with the nonprofit. I deal primarily with the back end stuff. So it's the corporate stuff, the HR, the finances, all that kind of stuff. But what I really enjoy is we've got a lot of young people, young staff. Working with them, often someone will knock on my cubicle wall and say, can you come talk to me a little bit? I'm about to have a very difficult conversation with someone, and I don't know how to broach the subject, or I've got this presentation or this idea that I have, and I'm not sure that it comes across correctly. Can you help me with that? And then outside of my working environment here, like I said, there's a lot of people who I've crossed paths with over the years. Many of them come to me and just say, look, I'd like for you to take a look at this presentation, or I'd like for you to talk to our sales team about the beginning of the year and how we're going to change things. So it's kind of my day. I enjoy just giving back. It's a lot of fun.
That's amazing. Um, you've said that you were a chief storytelling executive at IBM. How you must have seen so much, not just in corporate America, with how high performing teams need to be a little bit more creative and influence their customers, their clients, enterprise level, B2B, et cetera. Why do you think so many high performing teams struggle with creativity?
Well, I think it's how most of the time it's how they're measured. Often the organizations have the measurements wrong. I remember working with a bunch of business development reps one time, and they were being measured on whether they made 300 calls a week or not. That's what they were measured on. And then I said, well, what does success look like? And they said, well, success looks like I think it was 5 or 4 or 5 warm hand calls off to a business salesperson. So I said, so you make 300 calls and you actually get 4 successes. I said, that tells me that you're basically upsetting 296 people a week that don't want to talk to you and don't want to talk to anyone from your organization. So wouldn't it be better to think more about the customer, spend some more time and make less calls, but make them more specific and make every conversation that you have matter. And that was just a matter of measurement. It was like somebody told them you have to make these many calls, and that was insensitive to do that. So I think we get ahead of ourselves sometimes and think that, well, if we just make 300 calls, then we're going to get the results we need. When in reality, I worked with a couple of these reps and I said, well, make your 20 calls, 40 calls, whatever it is you make before lunch. I said, but after lunch, focus on 3 customers and just do 3 customers. And if at the end of the week you have 9 successes and you haven't done 300 calls, somebody's still going to like you. They're going to still want you around.
Right.
And I've had so many people come back to me and say exactly. They started enjoying doing that because they learned more about what the customer wants.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And is this pretty standard across industries?
Well, again, I don't want to, paint with such a broad brush that everybody has this problem. A lot of it just has to do with how are you trying to move the people? We're all in the moving business. Simon Sinek, I think it was, wrote a book and he talks about everyone's in sales, and we're all about moving people. And our job as leaders, as a parent, as an educator, as a spouse, we have ideas, we have things we want to move someone from where they're currently sitting or where they're thinking to something new. And that moving of people is one that is a privilege to do that, but it's also a responsibility on your part to do it correctly. And my basis, I guess, if I were to, if somebody were to say, so what is it you do? Um, and why is it you do it? I think the biggest thing we get wrong is that most often our people are in the mindset of trying to get people to buy something.
Mhm.
The salesperson is always, the ABCs always be closing. It's this idea that I've got to get you to buy something. I got to get you to write a check or whatever. And in my view of things, you're missing a target. Instead of getting them to buy something, your job should be to get them to believe something. Because if you get them to believe something, they will buy whatever it is you've got, especially if what it is that they believe and what you're selling,
Mhm.
aligns. But if your goal is only to get them to buy, then your language is going to be different. Your attitude is going to be different. Your goal is going to be different. And it shows, and no one likes to be sold to. And they can tell that you're sellers. And anybody who's been in sales knows that, if you come across as a salesperson, these shields go up and all of a sudden people are holding onto their wallets and they're cautious. Whereas if you change your approach to just saying, I've got something that's incredible, and I'd love to explore that with you and share with you a little bit about what we're doing and maybe understand a little bit more about what you're doing.
Mhm.
That curiosity, inviting them in, giving them the opportunity to buy rather than trying to sell to them. And that's kind of a basis of what I try to help people do. I think you can coerce people into buying something. I mean, I saw it happen a lot. There was a lot of very successful or people who were considered successful salespeople who sold, enterprise deals to companies, and then we would come along behind them and find out that the people were not installing the software or not using it, because they didn't believe it. They bought it. They were coerced into buying it, but if they had believed in it, they would have done something about it. In other words, they would say, "I can't wait for the opportunity to install this and run it, whatever." And instead, it was called shelfware. And to me, it was the worst thing you could do is to sell something that someone wouldn't use. So that made a difference. I guess it made a difference in the way I did things.
Okay.
But the concept, I guess, is when you're inviting someone in, when you're exploring things with them, it's not about. I've watched sales executives tell salespeople, "Okay, you're going into this meeting. When you're coming out of this meeting, I need to know how big the deal is. What's the impending event? Who's the decision makers? I mean, all those things that you get, and that's your job is to do that. And in reality, it might be better if you were to go in and say, look, here's what we want to do. Right now, they don't think of us as someone who could offer this service or this product or whatever. They're not even thinking about us. Your job this meeting is just to get them interested and show relevance. That's all. If you can just get them to consider that we might be a player, that's enough. And then we'll have another conversation later that we'll talk about our credibility and our vision or whatever. Because I have this concept, I guess, and I don't like using the word framework because so many people just hang a framework down. But I think that in conversations that you have, the very first thing you have to do is to be interesting. Then once you get someone interesting, and interesting doesn't necessarily take a lot of time, but interesting, well crafted will turn someone's head.
Mhm.
And a lot of story principles and stuff will do that. There was a time in which I sold workflow and document management. Okay, so you put documents away in the system. And I remember starting off talks by asking people, you know, I just had a big picture of a squirrel on the screen. I said, "Do you see this? It's a squirrel." I said, "Do you know what a squirrel is?" And they go, "Yeah, we have squirrels." I'm like, "Really? Okay." I said, "Did you know that when a squirrel hides a nut, their brains are wired and so that they point triangulation points, to triangulate where that nut is.
Mhm.
And their brains can handle up to 3,000 points of triangulation. 3,000 of these reference points they have to find something. And yet they only find about 25% of the nuts they hide. And the whole time they're listening to this and going, I thought he was going to talk about document management. What's he talking about? And I've got them because they're thinking about squirrels, right? They're thinking about squirrels. So that's interest. So you, first of all, you get them to turn their head and go, what's he? I mean, even if it's an odd thing, they go, their brain is trying to figure out, okay, so how does this match? And then you give them the relevance and you say, well, you know that we as humans can only find things based on 3 points of triangulation, not 3,000, 3 points.
Mhm.
And you think you're going to take a document and put it inside of a subfolder, inside of a subfolder, inside of another subfolder, in some drive somewhere, and 10 years from now find it. And then I would just say, are you nuts? And I would point to the squirrel, right? Okay, so that's interest and relevance. And all I want them to do is next time they see a squirrel, I want them to think about us. I want them to and I've had people approach me in the hallway of a conference one time, and I was with a vice president at the time, which was kind of embarrassing, but we were walking down the hallway and this person came up and said, Lewis, you're that pig guy. Because I had talked about a pig in something that we did. And I said, yeah, that's me. And the vice president said, what do you mean a pig guy? I said, don't worry about it. He's thinking about us. He's thinking about us. That's the main thing. We've been interesting. We've been relevant. And then you get into the third conversation, which is vision and credibility. So why is this important? And in the squirrel case, I talk about the fact that we do document management and we help companies find things that they put away and we make it easy and all that. And that's the part that, unfortunately, that vision and credibility part is the part that most salespeople focus on. And in fact, I challenge people. I say, go look in your presentations that you have. And I would guess that by slide 3, you have a bunch of logos on the screen that talk about who you are and how big you are and the companies you work with. And you've got all that. You're talking about vision and credibility. You've introduced yourself, which is probably slide 1. And slide 2, you've done a little bit of something. And then slide 3, you've talked about vision and credibility. And you've never established interest or relevance.
Mhm.
And you've just jumped right to vision and credibility. And you're hoping that's going to persuade them. And in reality, that's head stuff. And you miss the heart stuff. So you got to get them to come out of their mode and think about that. And then after the vision and credibility piece, which you share, so how are we going to keep you from being a squirrel or whatever? This is what we're going to do. And this is how it's going to look to you. And this is how your life's going to look like. And you understand how their life currently exists. Have you ever lost a document? Tell me that story about how you lost a document. What did that mean to you? What if and then you tell them a news story. And then the last conversation you have is it's a confirmation. A lot of salespeople call it a closing. We're going to close the deal. And I think it's more of a let's get things going because you found what we talked about interesting. It's obviously relevant to you because you have this need.
Mhm.
You've seen where we could actually help you. So what's keeping us from doing this? That's the kind of flow. And that's a kind of a different flow often than a lot of sales things where we just give you the plus and the minuses and you weigh us out. And if we're better than anyone else, you'll write a check and we'll walk away.
Okay. Is this the first touch point you're having with the client that you're describing?
The first touch point definitely is interest and relevance.
Okay.
And it's according to where the client is at. When I was with IBM, we would step into a client that I know was a Microsoft customer. Hard
Mhm.
sell. They spoke at their conferences. They were a reference point. Okay. My job in my first presentation is not to try to get them to say, we don't want Microsoft anymore. We want IBM. That's not going to happen.
No.
So the best thing I can do is get you interested and show that we're relevant. Just open the doors, open your mind, say something that they've never heard before, or maybe say it in a way that they've never heard it before, that they just go, huh. You
Okay.
can get them just to go, huh.
It is a first conversation though then.
Yes, very much. These are very, very much first conversations. And then the vision and credibility stuff follows. And especially in technology, you can't get lost in the weeds of the technology itself because often especially if you're talking to decision makers. I use this analogy of Kirk and Spock on the Star Trek movies. Because Kirk's he's the commander and captain, and he runs the ship, and he makes decisions on the fly, and things are very, let's try this kind of thing. And Spock is very black and white. It's procedural. There's rules and whatever. And I tell people, Kirk is your business person, and Spock is your technology person.
Yep.
And there's going to be questions that Spock's going to have, and you have to be able to give those. But be prepared that when you're presenting a technology, Spock will look at something and go, why is that button on that screen blue? Everyone, all the others are green. Why is that one blue? I don't understand why. And they get hung up over some little thing like that. Whereas Kirk goes, what happens if I push it? He's like, let's fly this thing. And so when you're trying to move someone along, you have to understand where they're at frame wise.
Right.
Don't get off course, because I've seen people go off on a technology discussion in front of Kirk, and Kirk gets bored. And by the way, he's the one who's going to make the purchase. Don't lose them. So there's that. You just have to consider who you're talking to and where it is, I guess.
Okay. So as you're giving back now, when you talk about these, these stories that you start with to get the attention, to build the trust, and to be remembered as well, what trends are you seeing when you do still? I'm assuming you still coach folks, right? So what do you?
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with story, what I would consider story discovery. To be a good storyteller, and by the way, there are many people who have said, storytellers have this unfair competitive advantage, and it's true. We do. And if you're a good storyteller, in fact, I've always told my sales reps, if you have a great product and a mediocre story, and I have a mediocre product and a great story, I'm going to beat you every day. I'm going to win the business because I have an advantage. And so this idea of being able to tell a story that's worthwhile, and story itself is not as much just telling it, it's also listening for it and not settling for less. And you talked about going forward with a brochure, and you start, feature dumping and whatever. And you said you were young, and I've talked to a number of reps who say, Louis, you've been around for decades, and I'm young and I'm new, and I'm like, you have this superpower you're not using, which is you're young and you can be curious, and people allow you to be curious. And so when you make a phone call, instead of trying to impress someone, be curious. I would tell sometimes our reps, I said, instead of calling and say, hi, I'm so-and-so, and I'm with IBM, and we sell workflow products. Do you want any? Call them and say, look, I'm so-and-so, and I work with a number of really, really smart people. And I'm young, and I'm kind of new at this, but I understand you guys do an amazing job where you're at.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously you'll have workflow. I'm just curious, would you mind spending a few minutes with me, just kind of sharing with me so I can learn a little bit about what that looks like?
Okay. So
And
that's
ask them
the
their
young
day looks.
person. How would you coach the older person?
The older person can have the same advantage, first of all, because it's just a matter. In fact, the older person has a little bit of a different look, and they can say, I've been around this for quite some time, and I know it's changing. And I know it's changing for people like yourself who's in the middle of this.
Mm-hmm.
And I can only imagine what some of those decisions look like. I was wondering, when things are going really well within your organization with this particular process or whatever, can you tell me the story of when that really worked well and what that looked like? And then contrast to that, you go, and can you tell me maybe a time when it didn't work well, when things blew up? And what did that cause? And I have not told them about product. I have not talked about selling. I just want to understand their story, because the idea is to move person. You have to first of all understand, where are they at currently, and where do I want to get it to? And if I can somehow paint a picture or get them to relive, especially relive something, if I get them to relive and feel something that they felt when things were broken, and I can say, can you imagine what it would be like if, and then you tell them the new story of how it would look with your new product or new whatever. Wouldn't have that been a whole lot better? You wouldn't have been chasing around people on Christmas holiday trying to do whatever. I think what a difference that would have made, right? If you could have done that. And that's what we do. We keep that from happening. And so you basically step them into it. And just having experience is always good. And this is another clue, every story you gather is one you can use. Yesterday, for instance, I was talking to a team of people. They work at a cardboard manufacturer. Mm-hmm. That's what they do. They're one of the leading manufacturers of cardboard containers and storage boxes and whatever. And they were asking about approaches and questions and stuff. And I said, think about this. And I'll ask you, have you ever ordered something from like Amazon or something, and it came in not a cardboard box, but just a package, a wrapping of some kind, and it was tossed up on your porch and it broke or it was damaged or whatever because it wasn't in a protective cardboard box.
Mhm.
And then there's other times when you get something and it's in a box and it's really secured or whatever. Cardboard's important to your satisfaction. And that's what we do is we help people have great experiences in food manufacturing, whatever. They talk about about the fact the cardboard, but what that does for you is to make sure that when the product comes to you, it's safe, it's reliable, it's whatever.
Mhm.
But you try to get them to relive an example of when they stepped out on their porch and picked up a package and realized, I needed this today, but it's broken because it wasn't shipped properly or because it wasn't packaged properly. And so your concept is if you can get them, and telling stories is one way to do this. But the idea is when you're having a conversation with someone and you're trying to give them information, which is probably the wrong target,
Mhm.
their brain will shut off. The side of the brain that has their creativity and has their will just sit there and listen for information. In fact, a pet peeve of mine is whenever someone starts a conversation in front of an audience or in front of a group and says, for the next 30 minutes, I'm Lewis, and for the next 30 minutes, I'm going to talk to you technology. The words I'm going to talk to you is
Ah,
horrible. I'm going to talk to you. I grew up in the South, and when my dad ever came to me and said, Lewis, I need to talk to you, there was nothing going to be good following that. That was not going to be a good conversation.
okay.
Right. And also when you say, I'm going to talk to you, it actually gives them, their brain, the ability to just check out, go, okay, I'm going to be talked to. All right. So bring it. Right. And instead you should be able to stand up in front of people and say, I'm Lewis. And for the next 30 minutes, I'd love to explore some things with you. I'd love to put some things out there that you may already know, which would be great. And there's some things, hopefully, with your investment of time that you haven't heard it yet, or maybe you're hearing it differently. But I'd like for us to play around with some of these ideas while we're here, and let's have a conversation. That is totally different than I'm going to talk to you for 30 minutes.
That is very different. I felt different as you switched up the words.
Yeah. And if you can invite them in to that conversation that you're about to have, even if you start off with a monologue, even if you start off with just, your pitch,
Mhm.
you have them probably leaning forward. They're trying to listen to things. You talked earlier about helping move people along, or what is that? Coercing them.
Mhm.
I have grandkids. I've got 9 grandkids. At Christmas time, we often will put a puzzle out on a table,
Mhm.
you know, a 2,000 piece puzzle or something out on the table. And we sit around the table and we do these puzzles just so that we adults can talk and whatever. But this has been years ago, but she's now 11, but Lily, my granddaughter, when she was about 3 or 4 or 5, she couldn't do the puzzle. It was just but she loves puzzles. So what we would do is we take a piece of the puzzle and we put it up on the china cabinet. And that was the last piece. And by the way, if you ever look for that piece, you're in trouble because it was up on the china cabinet. But we do the entire puzzle except for that one piece. And then we call Lily in and say, Lily, come in. And we give her that piece, and she'd crawl up on the table and on hands and knees and take that piece and find a little spot and move it around, and it clicks into place. And when it clicks into place, Lily did the puzzle. It doesn't matter that 1,999 pieces were done already. In her mind, she did the puzzle.
Okay.
And if you can take your person that you're trying to move along, if you could paint a picture of what the answer is like so that they put in the last puzzle piece,
Mhm.
you win. It's like good writers on TV shows and stuff will lead you toward a decision, and they'll foreshadow things and they'll do things that in the end your mind's going, okay, I know who did it. I know who caused that. I know whatever. And then when it comes to fruition that is the thing, they win. They're like, I get a hit from that, right? If you can do that same thing in your presentation, if you can do that same thing in your pitch and go, you talk about work, you talk about the way you work around and the problems that you're having in production. And if that didn't work that way, if it worked this way,
Mhm.
what would that mean to you?
Mhm.
And they drop in the last piece. That would mean we do this, or we could do that, or whatever. And it's like, you could have told them that. You could
Right.
have said, you know what, if you do this and you can do all these other things, but if you let them put in that last piece,
Right.
it's a win. It's just another thing that you allow them to participate in this. And so you're not, again, coercing them. You're just open-handedly going, here's something. What do you
Mhm.
think? Interest? Not? That's okay. Whatever. So
Sure.
sorry.
So, what is the biggest misconception leaders have about this method of engaging in a sale? Let's say, the storytelling versus the direct sales method.
Often they'll say it's not quick enough because I want something to happen quickly.
Right.
It's also contrary to most of their sales talks and sales things that they've had in the past. So you're actually asking them to change the way they do things.
Hmm.
And so that's a challenge. It also requires more thought process than process. It requires you to think more about the person that you're contacting and where they live. And it requires a lot of listening,
Yeah.
which I have little books. I have one sitting over here, little notebooks that I would keep whenever we were with people. And I would always tell myself, don't ever open your laptop. Don't take notes on your laptop. Take them on paper. Because if you're sitting at your laptop while they're talking, they have no idea if you're playing solitaire or what. If you're listening to them and you're writing down notes on a pad, they know you're writing notes about them. Okay. So use Notepad. And my notepads, I would often write the word wait, WAIT, because that would keep me from talking because it says, why am I talking? Because if they're talking, there's nothing I have to say that's more important than they're talking.
Okay, that's a great acronym.
I should be listening to them. I should be encouraging them to speak. In fact, I do whiteboard training at times, and people will talk about what makes a successful whiteboard session that you have with someone. And I said a successful whiteboard session is when by the time you're finished, they have the pen in their hand and they're at the board drawing stuff. Then you've won because they're now participating in this.
Hmm.
And when they ask things like, don't race that. We need to take a picture of it. You know, you've done a good job as far as displaying a whiteboard of something that they're interested in. So the idea is if you can take that same framework and think of instead of a conversation that I'm trying to have with you, if you can bear your story, if you can share your story with me, number one, it's a privilege. If you can't get them to share their story, like if they give you a requirement and you say, well, tell me what that looks like. And they go, I just need this thing.
Hmm.
They don't trust you. You haven't built a level of trust or a relationship with them that they're going to, because people tell stories to people that they trust.
Yep.
And if you can get them to be open and share a story with you, then you're part along the way already. So you want that to happen. And if you can kind of think of the fact that I don't want to be holding the pen, the verb, the pen in the end of this thing. I want them to have the pen. And I want them writing their own future, and I want them writing what it's going to look like, and I want them to fit that last piece of the puzzle. And then it's just a matter of sitting back and going, hey, so sounds great. Let's get started. What does it take to start? Right.
Okay.
And I know that sounds very simplistic, but a lot of executives don't understand it. A lot of executives are not used to it. And unfortunately, I should say in 2010, when I started as a storyteller, there on LinkedIn, there was about less than 10 of us. I think there was like 5 or so. Steve Clayton with Microsoft, myself, and a few others that were really chief storytellers, the name chief storyteller. And now there are thousands and thousands of storytellers, which I have to applaud that it's getting attention.
Hmm.
But I'm also a bit concerned about what story means to some people, because I think it's a matter of story is like a spice you put on top of something to make it better. And really, story is not that. Story is a foundation from which you build. And so a lot of times you just tear things down. And I'll tell you, a lot of executives and sales leaders and people inside of organizations that are doing okay, they don't want to change things.
No,
And
this
so,
this changing thought processes. It's not easy.
yeah, yeah, it's uncomfortable. Well, and actually, when we talk about sales, just the biggest competitor that I've ever had in sales, and I think this may be true for most sales, is not another company. It's the status quo. People are more likely to stay with what they're doing than to make a change.
Absolutely.
And so when you're going after someone to try to get them to move to something else, your biggest competitor is not the next person that's going to step in that door that's going to pitch them something. Your biggest competitor is just getting them in the mindset of finding the value of moving, and
Hmm.
also finding that the value of not the disadvantage of not moving is significant as well. So it's not just about improvements, it's about what are you keeping yourself from doing. You know, you're spending money today that you don't really need to be spending, or you're spending time and attention doing something else. What would it be like if every Friday you didn't have to do this stuff and you could do anything you wanted? What would you do on that Friday?
Hmm.
And get them to start imagining things that they haven't imagined before because they're so stuck in what they're doing. Some executives are open to it, some are not. I've been with both, and makes
I've
things
seen
interesting.
those type of questions come up mostly in discovery calls, like 2, 3 meetings later from the folks that actually know how to sell and they know how to drive the process forward. So, you mentioned that you're giving back and you coach. S What kind of clients do you have? Like, in what industries and what levels? I'm just curious.
It's a variety of industries, I guess. Say, most of my contacts have been somebody who's heard me speak or have worked alongside me, maybe moved from an organization that we worked together to some other organization, and for whatever reason, they're like, we're really having a struggle, and for some reason, I pop in their head, and it's like, well, maybe we could have Lewis talk to us or something. Let's throw a little Lewis at him and see what happens.
Okay.
And sometimes it's good, and sometimes, well, but anyway, it's mostly people who are struggling. And I'll tell you the advantage I have right now, and I actually appreciate this. Most of my career have been trying to get people to understand the value of story. And it's really hard, especially in well-established organizations. There's a book called Orbiting the Giant Hairball by a guy named Gordon McKenzie. I think I may have mentioned to you that to you in an earlier conversation. But in his analogy, he's passed away, but he was a creative at Hallmark, and he talked about the challenges of being a creative in an organization and what that means. And his book and my reading of his book actually changed my career and changed my path quite a bit. In that, at one point, I was doing things like making presentations and meeting with people and doing these things, and my manager had no idea what I was doing. They didn't understand it. They're like, people seem to like you, but I don't know what you're doing." And in his analogy, corporations, by processes and by things they do, they're like little hairs, and they gather together into a hairball.
Mhm.
And a hairball, when it gets big enough, it has gravity, and it sucks people in, and and more hairs and all that. And organizations doesn't have to be a large size to have a big hairball, because it's just the way we always do things. And what I was discovering was most people were just getting sucked into this complacency of doing the same things. And I was like, no, I'm out of here. Creativity crisis, I'm gone. And so I launched myself away and was doing things that, while it was successful, I was in danger, because I was out in space, nothingness of space. And in his book, he talks about that. You can't be there. What you have to do is you have to understand how to take what it is you do using the weight and gravity pull, orbit. Don't get sucked in, but orbit. Be close enough that you influence the hairball, but
Okay.
not so close that you get sucked into it. And that changed the perception in my mind from me going off and doing presentations to begin going, how do I help other people do presentations? How do I create things so that it's reusable? Because people would tell me, that's a great presentation, Lewis, but I could never do that because I'm not you. And I'm like, well, how can I help you? How can I? And so it was a change of trying to help people.
Mhm.
And for most of my career, I spent time just trying to get people to understand there need to be a change. And now I have the honor, privilege, whatever, is to people come to me and they want to change.
Okay.
So I don't have that big hurdle of saying, let me talk to you about your need. Most people are coming to me now going, I have a need. Can you help me? And that takes away so much of effort and time that I'm able to, in short periods of time, hopefully have an impact
Mhm.
at some level. So
Okay.
that's what I enjoy doing.
That's exciting. So, if there was one challenge that you could solve right now in this space, what would that be?
Probably the perception of buying and believing, just that difference
Okay.
of the difference between selling something versus giving someone an opportunity to buy. That's probably the biggest difference. And that goes for everything. That goes, as a parent with a child. It's
Mhm.
like, I can make you clean your room. I can force you to do that. But what if we were to somehow figure out how I can lead you toward that so that you want to clean your room?
Okay.
How could I not coerce you or entice you, but how can I share something with you that about my life, or you know son, you're constantly going to school without their stuff that you need. That's got to be embarrassing. You have to go and borrow stuff and whatever. Do you think we could change that? And maybe if you're a little more organized in this area, you wouldn't have. Maybe if let's set up a place where you keep your stuff that's going to school next day, and put that in a place where as you walk out the door, it's right there. Maybe that will help. That kind of an approach, rather than just hammering and force feeding stuff. It's a soft sell,
Okay.
so to
No,
speak.
I agree with that. I think influencing and motivating and inspiring have different outcomes. Well, to wrap up here, I'd love to ask you some rapid fire questions. Just a couple. What book should every CEO read right now?
Goodness, there's a couple. To Sell as Human is a good one. I think it's about Simon Sinek. I think is To Sell as Human. Start with Why is another Sinek book, which is really good, which kind of leads towards stories, because his whole thing is around the golden circle of what it is we do, how do we do it, and why do we do it, and how we normally start from the outside in. We do this. This is how we do it, and we want it because we want you to buy something. Versus we believe, and these are, in other words, that's another thing he talks about is the center is we believe something. We believe something, and because of that, we do this, and we happen to sell these things, kind of thing. So I think that Start with Why is probably a good one. And as far as just better skills in communicating and presenting, anything that Guy Kawasaki puts out is good. Rules for Revolutionaries, some of the stuff that and I say that because he influenced me heavily as I was coming along, but he was one of the first evangelists at Apple. In fact, he was the first evangelist at Apple, and back in the Mac days, and I'm a big Mac believer. So I kind of followed that.
Okay. And what is the most overrated leadership advice?
Always be closing. Hate that. That's yeah, because you're closing people's mind. That's what you're doing. You're just closing. You're just closing. You're not closing deals. You're closing appointments. You're closing all the wrong things. And no one, I don't think anyone should ever consider the time when someone writes a check or signs a contract as the close. That's the start. That's when things get fun, and that's when things should become significant. And so it's not about let's close this deal. It's like, no, I don't want to open this opportunity. I want to open this ability to do something. So this always be closing, I think, is wrong.
Okay.
My opinion.
And no, that's interesting. I think it does bring a level of pressure, which is
I think it'd be better to say always be moving. Always be moving. Be nimble yourself. Be able to move and adapt. I think it was Darwin that said it's not the strongest or the not the strongest or the smartest in the world that's going to survive. It's the one that's most likely to adapt. And I think we have to be able to move ourselves and be adaptable to things around us, to conversations we're having. And then we have to, look at moving people. How do I move them from one place to the other? And it's not a matter of coercing them, but inviting them.
Louis, thank you for your insights. For listeners who want to get in touch with Louis, please find him on LinkedIn at Louis Richardson or creativitycrisis.com.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for joining CEO Tech Talks. I hope today's conversation sparked new insights and inspiration for your own leadership journey. Until next time, stay inspired, stay visionary, and keep leading with light. Brought to you by Neura AI Consulting.